A millionaire used to his life of luxury set up an experiment to prove that his maid was exaggerating her hardships. But upon arriving at her modest home, he was confronted with a reality he never imagined. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay with us. Boris Heller stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, surveying the glittering skyline with a glass of 30-year-old scotch. In his hand, the city lights twinkled like the diamonds adorning his wife's neck at the charity gala they'd just hosted. At 45, Boris had everything most men could only dream of: a real estate empire worth billions, a stunning socialite wife, and a life of unimaginable luxury. But tonight, he wasn't admiring the view. He was irritated. His housekeeper, Melissa Carter, had called in late again this morning, citing some family emergency. The third time this month. His annoyance had been building for weeks as he listened to her explanations about challenges and difficult circumstances. How difficult can her life really be? Boris muttered, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. She has a job with excellent pay, flexible hours, and generous benefits, yet she acts like she's carrying the weight of the world. His wife, Victoria, slinked into the room in her silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled even at this late hour. "Still thinking about Melissa's excuses?" she asked, pouring herself a glass of Chardonnay. "I'm convinced she's exaggerating," Boris said. "People like her always dramatize their problems to gain sympathy. I bet if I spent one day in her shoes, I'd find it completely manageable." Victoria raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "That's an interesting theory. Why don't you test it?" "Test what?" "Your theory. Spend a night at Melissa's place. See firsthand if she's really struggling or just making excuses." Boris scoffed. "That's absurd. Why would I subject myself to—" "Because you're a man of action, not just theories," Victoria interrupted, "and because you've been complaining about this for weeks. Either prove your point or let it go." Boris fell silent, considering the challenge. He had built his fortune by taking calculated risks, by testing hypotheses before making business decisions. Why should this be any different? "Fine," he finally said. "I'll do it. One night at Melissa's place. I'll call it a social experiment." Victoria smirked. "And how exactly do you plan to invite yourself over?" Boris thought for a moment, then smiled. "I'll tell her we had a fight, that I need a place to stay for one night while things cool down." "Using our marriage as an excuse? How thoughtful," Victoria replied sarcastically. "It's just for one night," Boris insisted. "I'll prove my point, and then we can move on from this whole discussion." The next morning, Boris approached Melissa as she dusted the living room. At 36, Melissa had worked for the Harringtons for almost 5 years. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was something compelling about her, a quiet dignity in her movements, a spark of intelligence in her eyes that contradicted her humble position. "Melissa," Boris began, clearing his throat, "I find myself in an awkward situation and could use your help." Melissa stopped dusting, her expression concerned. "Is everything all right, Mr. Heller?" "Victoria and I had a disagreement. Rather heated, I'm afraid. I think it would be best if I gave her some space tonight." "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. The thing is," Boris continued, feigning discomfort, "all my friends are out of town for this investment conference, and I'd rather not stay at a hotel where I might be recognized. The press would have a field day." Melissa's brow furrowed. "I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Heller. I was wondering if I could stay at your place just for tonight." Seeing her surprise, he quickly added, "I would compensate you generously, of course." Melissa hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the request. "My apartment is very small, sir. Nothing like what you're accustomed to." "I'm aware it won't be the Ritz," Boris said with a forced chuckle, "but I'm not particularly picky. I just need a couch for one night." After several long moments, Melissa nodded reluctantly. "Of course, Mr. Heller. If you really need a place to stay—" "Excellent," Boris replied, concealing his satisfaction. "I'll meet you after work." That evening, Boris followed Melissa's worn Honda Civic in his Aston Martin, leaving the pristine streets of Upper East Side for the more humble neighborhoods of Queens. As the buildings grew shorter and less impressive, Boris felt a strange combination of curiosity and apprehension. Melissa's apartment was in a modest brick building, nothing like the gleaming glass tower where Boris resided. He parked, his luxury car on the street, ignoring the stares of passers-by, and grabbed a small overnight bag from the trunk. "This way, Mr. Heller," Melissa said, leading him up 3 flights of stairs. The elevator, she explained apologetically, was out of order again. Boris tried not to show his dismay. Her apartment was on the 4th floor, at the end of a narrow hallway with worn carpet. When she unlocked the door and ushered him inside, Boris's experiment truly began. The contrast with his own home was jarring. Where his penthouse was spacious and airy, Melissa's apartment was small and cramped. Where his furniture was custom-made and imported, hers was clearly second-hand and well-worn. The living room and kitchen were essentially one space, with a small hallway presumably leading to a bedroom and bathroom. "It's not much," Melissa said, a hint of defensiveness in her voice, "but it's home." Boris forced a smile. "It's cozy." Melissa showed him around the apartment, which took all of 2 minutes. The couch would be his bed, a fact that made Boris wince internally. There was a small television, a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks, and a few framed photographs, the only real decoration. "The water pressure isn't great," Melissa warned, as she showed him the tiny bathroom. "And sometimes the water runs a bit brown, especially in the morning. Just let it run for a minute and it clears up." "Brown water?" Boris felt his stomach turn. "I usually make dinner around 7, Melissa continued. "Nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join me." "Thank you," Boris replied, trying to hide his discomfort. He was already regretting this experiment, but his pride wouldn't let him back out now. As Melissa busied herself in the kitchen, Boris awkwardly sat on the lumpy couch, feeling utterly out of place. The noise from neighboring apartments filtered through the thin walls, a baby crying, a couple arguing, music playing too loudly. He thought of his soundproofed penthouse and sighed. Boris's attention was drawn to a stack of textbooks on the coffee table. He picked one up, Advanced Nursing Practices and Procedures. Next to it was a notebook filled with meticulous notes in Melissa's handwriting. "You're studying nursing," he called to her in the kitchen. Melissa appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Yes, sir, I take night classes at the community college. I'm hoping to become a registered nurse eventually." "I had no idea," Boris said, genuinely surprised. In 5 years he had never bothered to ask about her aspirations. "It's taking longer than I hoped," she admitted. "Between work, classes, and caring for my grandmother, there aren't enough hours in the day, but I'll get there eventually." Before Boris could respond, the front door opened, and an elderly woman shuffled in, leaning heavily on a walker. "Grandma," Melissa said, hurrying to help her. "You should have called. I would have come down to help you up the stairs." The old woman waved her off. "I'm not an invalid, Mel. The exercise is good for me." She noticed Boris and eyed him curiously. "And who might this be?" "This is Mr. Heller, my employer," Melissa explained. "He's staying with us tonight." Boris stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. Carter, a pleasure to meet you." "It's Ms. Eleanor Wade, actually," the old woman corrected him, her handshake surprisingly firm. "But you can call me Ellie. Everyone does." As the evening progressed, Boris found himself increasingly uncomfortable, not just with the physical limitations of Melissa's apartment, but with the realization that he knew almost nothing about her life outside of his home. He watched as she effortlessly balanced preparing dinner, helping her grandmother with medication, and reviewing her study notes, all with a quiet efficiency that he couldn't help but admire. Dinner was simple, baked chicken, rice, and vegetables, but Boris had to admit it was delicious. As they ate at the small kitchen table, he found himself drawn into their conversation, learning about Melissa's childhood in a small town in Pennsylvania, her dreams of becoming a nurse, and the circumstances that had brought her to New York. "My parents died in a car accident," Melissa explained. "I moved here to take care of Grandma. She's the only family I have left." And she takes damn good care of me, Ellie added with a wink. Even if it means putting her own life on hold. It's not on hold, Grandma, Melissa protested. It's just moving at a different pace than I planned. Boris sat quietly, absorbing this information. He had always seen Melissa as just his housekeeper, a service provider, not a person with her own complex life and struggles. For the first time, he felt a twinge of shame at his assumptions. After dinner, Melissa excused herself to study, leaving Boris with Ellie. The old woman studied him with sharp eyes that belied her frail appearance. "So you had a fight with your wife?" she asked bluntly. Boris shifted uncomfortably. "Something like that." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "Melissa's too polite to ask what you're really doing here, but I'm not. Men like you don't end up in apartments like this unless they're running from something or looking for something." Boris met her gaze, strangely compelled to be honest. "Maybe a bit of both," he admitted. Ellie nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "Well, whatever your reasons, try not to get in Melissa's way. That girl works harder than anyone I've ever known, and she doesn't need any more complications in her life." As Boris settled onto the uncomfortable couch that night, a thin blanket pulled up to his chin, he couldn't stop thinking about what Ellie had said. He had come here to prove that Melissa's life wasn't as difficult as she made it seem. Instead, he was beginning to suspect that she had been understating her challenges all along. Sleep eluded him as he listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the building, pipes clanging, neighbors moving about, the occasional siren in the distance. Through the thin walls, he could hear Melissa's soft voice reading medical terminology aloud, committing it to memory long after midnight. Boris stared at the ceiling, a realization slowly dawning on him. This experiment might reveal more about himself than about Melissa, and he wasn't entirely sure he was ready to face what it would show. Boris awoke with a crick in his neck and an unfamiliar ceiling above him. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then reality crashed back. He was on Melissa's lumpy couch halfway through his social experiment. A glance at his Rolex showed it was 5:30 a.m. He never woke this early at home. The soft sounds of movement in the kitchen drew his attention. Melissa was already up, making coffee in the dim light of morning. She wore simple sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a stark contrast to the pressed uniform she always wore at his home. "Morning," Boris said, sitting up and rubbing his neck. Melissa turned, surprised. "Mr. Heller, I'm sorry if I woke you. I tried to be quiet." "You didn't wake me," he lied, standing and folding the blanket. "Do you always get up this early?" "Every day," she replied, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "I like to study for an hour before getting Grandma up and ready. Then I head to your place." Boris did the math in his head. If she studied from 5:30 to 6:30, then spent time with her grandmother before arriving at his penthouse by 8. Ooh. "When do you sleep?" he found himself asking. Melissa smiled faintly. "Enough. Coffee?" He accepted the mug with a nod of thanks, noticing her textbooks already spread out on the kitchen table. "Don't let me interrupt your routine," he said. "It's fine. I'm used to adapting." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you be going home today to Mrs. Heller?" The fabricated fight with Victoria. Boris had almost forgotten his excuse. "Yes, I should. Thank you for your hospitality." Melissa nodded, seemingly relieved that her home would soon return to normal. "There's bread for toast if you're hungry. I need to check on Grandma and give her morning medication." As she disappeared down the hallway, Boris sipped the coffee, surprisingly good, despite the humble surroundings, and tried to process his experience so far. He had expected to feel vindicated in his assumption that Melissa exaggerated her difficulties. Instead, he felt increasingly uncomfortable with his privilege and his ignorance of her reality. The bathroom further challenged his composure. As Melissa had warned, the water ran brownish at first, and the pressure was barely more than a trickle. The tiny shower stall, with its mildewed curtain and single shelf of inexpensive toiletries, made him long for his rainfall shower and heated marble floors at home. When he emerged, Melissa was helping Ellie into the kitchen, guiding her walker with gentle precision. "Morning, rich man. Ellie greeted him with a mischievous smile. "Sleep well on our luxury accommodations." "Grandma," Melissa admonished. "It's all right," Boris said, finding himself amused rather than offended by the old woman's directness. "And to answer your question, Ms. Wade, I've had better nights." "Haven't we all?" Ellie replied, lowering herself carefully into a chair. "But you know what they say, discomfort builds character." "Then I must have built quite a bit overnight," Boris said dryly. Ellie cackled with delight. "I like this one, Mel. He can take a joke." Breakfast was simple, toast and scrambled eggs, but the conversation was surprisingly engaging. Ellie had been a librarian before retirement and spoke knowledgeably about literature, politics, and history. Boris found himself drawn into a discussion about urban development, his professional specialty, and was impressed by her insightful questions. At 7:15, Melissa excused herself to get ready for work. "Mr. Heller, I usually leave at 7:30. Will you be ready by then?" Boris nodded, then glanced at Ellie. "Will you be all right on your own, Ms. Wade?" "Been taking care of myself for 78 years, she replied. "Besides, the home health aide comes at 9. Boris raised an eyebrow. "Home health aide?" "For my dialysis," Ellie explained. 3 times a week. Medicare covers it, thank God, or we'd be on the street. Another piece of information Boris hadn't known. He thought of his own robust health insurance policy, how he took for granted the comprehensive coverage that came with his position. While Melissa got ready, Boris found himself studying the photos on the bookshelf. One showed a younger Melissa in a graduation cap and gown, flanked by 2 smiling people he assumed were her parents. Another captured her in scrubs, seemingly from an earlier attempt at nursing school. A third showed Ellie, looking stronger and healthier, standing proudly beside a teenage Melissa. "She was top of her class, you know," Ellie said from behind him, having quietly maneuvered her walker into the living room. "Could have gone to any college she wanted." "What happened?" Boris asked. Ellie sighed. "Life happened. Her parents couldn't afford to send her anywhere but community college. Then they died, and she dropped everything to come take care of me." She fixed Boris with a penetrating stare. "She never complains, not once in all these years, but I know what she gave up for me." Before Boris could respond, Melissa emerged from her bedroom in her work uniform, hair neatly tied back, ready for another day of cleaning his penthouse. "Ready, Mr. Heller?" she asked, her tone shifting subtly to the professional one he was accustomed to. The drive back to Manhattan was mostly silent. Boris was lost in thought, processing all he had learned in just one night. The gleaming towers of the city seemed different somehow as they approached, less like monuments to success and more like barriers separating different worlds. At a red light, Melissa finally broke the silence. "Mr. Heller, I hope everything was satisfactory. I know it's not what you're used to." Boris turned to her. "Why didn't you ever tell me about your grandmother's health issues or your nursing studies? I would have adjusted your schedule." Melissa looked surprised by the question. "It's not your burden to bear, sir, and you pay me well to do a job, not to bring my problems to work." "But your late arrivals, the days you've called in, they've been because of your grandmother's health, haven't they?" She nodded, eyes fixed on the road. The dialysis schedule sometimes changes last minute, and when she has complications." She trailed off, then added firmly, "But I always make up the hours. I've never shortchanged you." "I never said you did," Boris replied, feeling a twinge of guilt at how quickly she jumped to defend her work ethic. When they arrived at his building, Boris expected to feel relief at returning to his world of luxury and comfort. Instead, he felt strangely unsettled. The doorman greeted him with a deferential nod. The elevator whisked them up in silent efficiency, and when the doors opened directly into his penthouse foyer, Victoria was waiting, elegantly dressed despite the early hour. "Darling," she said, kissing his cheek, "how was your social experiment?" Boris glanced at Melissa, who had already slipped away to begin her work duties, transforming instantly from the complex person he'd spent the night with back into the invisible housekeeper. "Enlightening," he replied, "more so than I anticipated." Victoria studied his face. "You look terrible. Go shower and change. The Morgans are coming for brunch at 11. Boris had forgotten all about the brunch as he headed to the master suite. With its sprawling bathroom and walk-in closets, he felt a strange sense of disconnect from the luxury surrounding him. The marble countertops and designer fixtures that had once seemed essential now felt excessive. After showering, relishing the powerful spray and endless hot water, Boris dressed in casual designer wear and found Victoria in the kitchen instructing the chef about the brunch menu. Melissa was quietly dusting the living room, her presence barely acknowledged. "Victoria," Boris said, "could I speak with you privately?" In his home office, Boris closed the door and turned to his wife. "I think we need to make some changes regarding Melissa." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Don't tell me you're firing her. Good housekeepers are impossible to find." "Not firing, promoting," Boris said. "She's studying nursing while working full-time and caring for her grandmother. She's clearly capable of much more." "So what are you suggesting? Making her our personal nurse?" Victoria asked with a hint of sarcasm. Boris ignored her tone. "I'm thinking of offering her a position in the HR department of Heller Enterprises. Better pay, regular hours, benefits that would cover her grandmother's medical expenses, and we could provide a scholarship for her nursing program." Victoria stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely." "All this from one night in Queens?" Victoria shook her head in disbelief. "Boris, darling, this is why I handle the charitable giving. You get too emotionally involved." "This isn't charity," Boris insisted. "It's an investment in someone with potential, and it's the right thing to do." Victoria studied him with newfound interest. "You really are serious," she said more softly. "What exactly happened last night?" Boris struggled to articulate the shift in his perspective. "I saw how hard she works, Victoria, not just at her job, but at building a better life. And I realized I've been taking her for granted, taking a lot of things for granted." "So you're feeling guilty about your privilege," Victoria summarized. "That's natural, Boris, but you can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone, just—" He paused, considering. "Just trying to be a better person than I was yesterday." Victoria's expression softened. "Well, that I can support." She touched his arm. "Do what you think is right, darling. But remember, the Morgans will be here in an hour, and Ted still wants to discuss that downtown development project." As she left, Boris remained in his office thinking about how to approach Melissa with his proposal. He knew it might seem like charity to her, that her pride might make her resistant, but he was determined to find a way to help her that preserved her dignity. Through the window, he could see the city spread out below him, a sprawling tapestry of lives and stories. Somewhere in Queens, Ellie was receiving her dialysis treatment, and here, just rooms away, Melissa was dusting his shelves of designer accessories that cost more than her monthly rent. The contrast made him profoundly uncomfortable in a way he had never experienced before. Boris Heller, who had built his fortune on understanding markets and seizing opportunities, realized he had fundamentally misunderstood something much more important: the value of human struggle and resilience. He thought of Melissa studying, late into the night after a full day of work, of her quiet determination to build a better future despite the obstacles. He thought of his own life, how everything had come relatively easily to him. Elite schools, family connections, capital for his first investments. What had begun as a cynical experiment to prove his housekeeper was exaggerating her problems had transformed into something unexpected, a mirror reflecting his own entitled worldview and moral shortcomings. Boris took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. The Morgans would arrive soon, business would continue as usual, but something within him had shifted irrevocably, and he knew that his relationship with Melissa and his understanding of his place in the world would never be the same again. The brunch with the Morgans proceeded as these social business meetings always did, mimosas and small talk giving way to thinly veiled negotiations over gourmet food. Ted Morgan wanted Boris to invest in his downtown redevelopment project, and Boris found himself going through the motions, nodding at appropriate intervals, while his mind continually drifted to Melissa. She moved efficiently around the penthouse, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates with the practiced invisibility of service staff. He noticed how the Morgans barely glanced at her, how she seemed to fade into the background despite being physically present. exactly as she had at every gathering he'd ever hosted. When Ted excused himself to take a call, Charlotte Morgan leaned toward Victoria, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Your housekeeper seems competent. Is she available for occasional work? Our last one left without notice." "Melissa has been with us for years," Victoria replied. "We're actually considering moving her to a different position within Boris's company." Charlotte looked surprised. "Really? What a waste of good household training." Boris felt a flare of irritation. "She's studying to become a nurse. Hardly a waste of her potential." Charlotte blinked, clearly taken aback by his tone. "Well, how? Admirable. Though one does wonder why she didn't pursue that initially instead of domestic work." "Not everyone has the same opportunities, Charlotte," Boris heard himself saying. "Some people have to work harder for the things we take for granted." An awkward silence fell over the table. Victoria shot Boris a warning glance, but he found he didn't care. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Boris Heller was seeing his social circle with new eyes, and he wasn't particularly impressed by the view. After the Morgans departed, Victoria confronted him in the kitchen. "What was that about?" "Charlotte Morgan's husband controls half the zoning board, Boris. We need them on our side for the West Side project." "I'm tired of the casual elitism," Boris replied, surprising himself with his candor. "The way we talk about people who work for us, as if they're not even human." Victoria studied him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "One night, Anne Queens has turned you into a socialist," she remarked dryly. "Should I be worried?" "Not about my politics," Boris assured her. "Maybe about my awakening conscience." "That sounds significantly more troubling," Victoria said, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "Well, if you're serious about helping Melissa, I think it's nice. Unexpected, but nice." Boris watched as Melissa entered the kitchen to clean up the last of the brunch dishes. "Melissa," he called, "when you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you in my office." 15 minutes later, Melissa knocked softly on his office door. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Heller?" "Come in, please," Boris said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He noticed her hesitation. This wasn't their usual dynamic. "You're not in trouble," he added quickly. "Quite the opposite." Melissa sat, her posture straight, hands folded in her lap. "Is this about last night? I hope the arrangement was satisfactory." "It was educational," Boris replied honestly. "But that's not why I wanted to talk to you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Melissa, how long have you been studying nursing?" She looked surprised at the question. "On and off for about 3 years, sir. I started before moving in with my grandmother, then had to take a break when her health declined. I've been back at it for the past 18 months. "And how much longer until you complete the program?" "At my current pace? About 2 more years. But it could be longer if Grandma needs more care, or if my schedule at work changes." Boris nodded, then made his decision. "I'd like to offer you a new position, administrative manager in our HR department at Heller Enterprises. The salary would be significantly higher than what you earn now, with regular hours, full benefits, and tuition assistance for your nursing program." Melissa stared at him, clearly stunned. "Mr. Heller, I don't understand. Why would you—" "Because you're intelligent, hard-working, and clearly capable of more than dusting my shelves." Boris interrupted. "And because I believe in investing in people with potential." Melissa's expression shifted from shock to wariness. "With all due respect, sir, is this because you feel sorry for me after seeing my apartment? Because I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Boris assured her. "It's an opportunity, one you've earned through years of dedicated service and demonstrated ambition." He leaned forward. "Melissa, I've watched you manage a demanding job, care for your grandmother, and pursue education with remarkable determination. Those are exactly the qualities I value in my executive team." Melissa fell silent, processing his words. "What about your housekeeping needs?" she finally asked. "We'll hire someone else," Boris said with a dismissive wave. "That's not your concern. And the benefits, they would cover my grandmother's medical expenses." "Completely. Our executive health plan is comprehensive. Dialysis, medications, home health aids, all covered. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. This is unexpected, sir. I need time to think about it. Of course, Boris nodded. Take the weekend. We can discuss details on Monday if you're interested. After Melissa left, visibly shaken by his proposal, Boris sat back in his chair, feeling strangely energized. He pulled up the financial reports for his various charitable foundations, scanning the allocations critically. Most supported prestigious arts organizations, medical research at elite institutions, and other causes that enhanced his social standing, more than they addressed real need. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Victoria entered, elegant in her casual designer wear. How did she take it? She asked, settling onto the leather sofa against the wall. With suspicion, Boris admitted. She thinks it's charity. Isn't it? Victoria challenged gently. No, Boris insisted. It's recognition of value that I've been blind to until now. He gestured to his computer screen. Look at our charitable giving, Victoria. Millions to the Metropolitan Opera, to cancer research at institutions already flush with funding, to architectural preservation of historic buildings. Those are worthy causes, Victoria defended. They are, Boris agreed, but they're also safe causes, prestigious causes, causes that earn us recognition at galas and in donor publications. He shook his head. What if we redirected even a portion of that money to things that would make immediate differences in people's lives? Subsidized housing in our buildings for essential workers, scholarships for students like Melissa, medical cost coverage for the uninsured. Victoria studied him with growing interest. You're serious about this? I am, Boris confirmed. One night in a different world has made me see our own world differently. Is that so hard to believe? For the Boris Heller I married? Yes, Victoria said frankly. You've always been generous, darling, but in the expected ways. This, she gestured vaguely, this moral awakening is something new. Boris considered her words. Maybe it's not new. Maybe it was always there, buried under ambition and the pursuit of success. He looked at his wife thoughtfully. Would it disappoint you if I became less focused on social prestige and more on actual impact? Victoria's expression softened. Boris, contrary to what you might think, I didn't marry you for your social standing or your money. I married you because beneath all that ambition and drive, I saw a good man. She smiled. If that good man wants to be more evident in your business decisions, I can only support it. For the first time since his night at Melissa's apartment, Boris felt completely aligned with himself and his path forward. Thank you, he said simply. The weekend passed with Boris unusually preoccupied. He found himself researching affordable housing initiatives, scholarship programs for non-traditional students, and healthcare accessibility issues, topics that had never before captured his attention. He called his attorney on Sunday to discuss restructuring his charitable foundation with a new mission focused on addressing systemic inequalities. Monday morning brought nervous anticipation. When Melissa arrived, Boris invited her immediately to his office. Have you had a chance to consider my offer? He asked once she was seated. Melissa nodded, her expression serious. I have, Mr. Heller, and while I'm incredibly grateful, I need to understand why you're doing this. What changed after one night in my apartment? Boris respected her directness. Everything, he admitted. Or maybe nothing changed except my awareness. He considered his next words carefully. Melissa, I've spent my life measuring success in dollars and square footage. I've accumulated more wealth than I could spend in several lifetimes, but watching you manage your challenges with dignity and determination made me question the real value of what I've built. Sir, please let me finish, Boris interrupted gently. I came to your apartment expecting to confirm my biases, that your life wasn't as challenging as you made it seem. Instead, I discovered my own ignorance. You work harder than anyone I know, not just at your job, but at building a meaningful life despite significant obstacles. He paused. I'm offering you this position because you deserve it, and because my company would benefit from someone with your work ethic and perspective. Melissa was quiet for a long moment. And my grandmother, she could keep her apartment? With the salary I'm offering, you could afford a better apartment in the same neighborhood if you wanted, or stay where you are and build savings. That would be entirely your choice. Finally, Melissa nodded. Then I accept, Mr. Heller, and I promise I won't let you down. I know you won't, Boris replied with confidence. Over the following weeks, Boris's transformation continued to surprise those around him. He restructured his foundation to focus on creating pathways to opportunity for underserved communities. He implemented policy changes at Heller Enterprises, raising minimum wages and improving benefits for all employees. And he started spending time volunteering at a community center in Queens, not far from Melissa's apartment, teaching financial literacy to young adults. Melissa thrived in her new role, bringing a practical perspective that had been missing from the executive team. Her insights into the needs of hourly workers led to policy changes that improved retention and job satisfaction across the company. She continued her nursing studies in the evenings, now supported by the company's tuition program. One evening, about 3 months after his experiment, Boris found himself back in Queens, this time intentionally. He had been invited to dinner at Melissa and Ellie's apartment, a gesture of friendship that crossed their previous employer-employee boundaries. Their apartment was the same modest space, but somehow it felt different to Boris now. He saw the warmth in the well-worn furniture, the character in the mismatched dishes, the love in the family photos. Ellie, looking healthier than before thanks to improved medical care, still treated him with the same irreverent candor that he had come to appreciate. "So, rich man," she said as they ate Melissa's homemade lasagna, "did you ever tell Melissa the real reason you showed up at our door that night?" Boris nearly choked on his water. "What do you mean?" Ellie fixed him with her penetrating gaze. "I may be old, but I wasn't born yesterday. You and your wife didn't have a fight. You were conducting some kind of social experiment." Melissa looked between them, confusion clear on her face. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" Boris set down his fork, embarrassed but unwilling to lie. "She's right," he admitted. "Victoria and I never fought. I wanted to see if your life was really as challenging as I perceived it to be from your occasional late arrivals and requested days off." Melissa's expression hardened. "So it was all a lie? Some kind of test?" "Yes," Boris acknowledged, shame coloring his voice. "Her test I failed spectacularly, thank goodness. I came expecting to confirm my biases about your life. Instead, I learned how narrow and privileged my perspective had been." "You could have just asked me about my life," Melissa said quietly. "Would I have truly understood without experiencing even a fraction of it firsthand?" Boris challenged gently. "I don't think so. I needed to see it, to feel the constraints and challenges you navigate daily with such grace." Ellie cackled, breaking the tension. "Well, your little experiment certainly worked out well for us in the end. Melissa loves her new job. I'm getting better medical care, and you found a conscience. Sounds like a win all around." Melissa's expression softened slightly, though wariness remained in her eyes. "Is that true? Did you really change because of that one night?" Boris considered the question seriously. "That night was the catalyst, but the change has been a journey. Every day I'm learning to see the world through a wider lens." He met her gaze directly. "I'm not the same man who showed up at your door with that ridiculous excuse, and I'm grateful for that." Slowly, Melissa's wariness gave way to understanding. "We all have our blind spots, Mr. Heller. The difference is whether we're willing to acknowledge them when they're pointed out to us." "Please," he said, "after everything, I think you can call me Boris." As the evening continued, Boris felt a sense of contentment that had eluded him in all his years of wealth accumulation. Here in this modest apartment in Queens, sharing a simple meal with people whose lives had become intertwined with his own, he was experiencing a different kind of richness, one he had been blind to before his experiment had opened his eyes. 6. Months after Boris's night in Queens, Heller Enterprises hosted its annual charity gala. Unlike previous years, where the event had been a showcase of wealth and social standing, this year's gala had a different focus, celebrating the company's new community initiatives and the people they had impacted. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was still decorated lavishly, but among the usual crowd of Manhattan elite were new faces, scholarship recipients, community organizers, healthcare workers, and others who had partnered with the Heller Foundation in its reimagined mission. Boris stood near the entrance, greeting guests in his bespoke tuxedo. Victoria beside him, stunning in an emerald gown. She squeezed his hand as they welcomed a group of nursing students who had received Heller scholarships. "You've created something meaningful here," she whispered. "I'm proud of you." Before Boris could respond, he spotted Melissa entering the ballroom. She looked transformed from the housekeeper he had once taken for granted, confident in a simple but elegant navy dress, her hair styled in soft waves. Beside her, Ellie moved slowly with her walker, dressed in a vintage suit that hinted at the stylish woman she had once been. "Melissa," Boris called, moving to greet them. "Ellie, I'm so glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Ellie replied with her characteristic directness. "Though I still think all this money could have gone directly to people who need it." Victoria laughed. "Ellie, you're absolutely right. But unfortunately, wealthy people sometimes need fancy parties to convince them to open their checkbooks. At least you're honest about it," Ellie acknowledged with a sharp nod of approval. As the evening progressed, Boris found himself shifting between his roles as host, businessman, and now somewhat unexpectedly social advocate. During dinner, he took the stage to address the gathered crowd, a mix of New York's wealthiest citizens and those who rarely entered their world. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, surveying the diverse audience. "For many years, the Heller Gala has been a celebration of philanthropy in its most traditional sense. We've raised millions for worthy causes, written checks, and felt good about our contributions." He paused, his gaze finding Melissa at her table. "But true philanthropy isn't just about giving money. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and the arbitrary nature of privilege." Boris took a breath. "6 months ago, I had an experience that fundamentally changed my understanding of success and wealth. I spent one night in an apartment in Queens, witnessing firsthand the challenges that many face daily, challenges I had been insulated from my entire life." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the typical gala speech they were accustomed to. That night showed me that the true measure of a person isn't their net worth or address, but their resilience, determination, and capacity for kindness in the face of adversity. Boris gestured toward Melissa's table. "I saw someone working multiple jobs while pursuing education and caring for family, all without complaint, all while maintaining dignity and grace that humbled me." Melissa dropped her gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but Ellie beamed proudly beside her. "Tonight, we're not just raising money," Boris continued. "We're launching a new vision for Heller Enterprises and our foundation, a vision that recognizes our responsibility to create opportunity, not just charity, to address systemic barriers, not just symptoms, to see people as partners in progress, not just recipients of our generosity." He outlined the initiatives already underway: affordable housing units in all new Heller developments, expanded educational scholarships, healthcare access programs, and more. The room was silent, some guests shifting uncomfortably as their own philanthropic practices were indirectly challenged, others leaning forward with interest. "I'm asking each of you to join us," Boris concluded. "Not just with your checkbooks, though those are certainly welcome," a ripple of appreciative laughter, "but with your time, your expertise, and most importantly, your willingness to see beyond the boundaries of privilege that separate us from our neighbors." The applause that followed was thoughtful rather than automatic. As Boris rejoined Victoria at their table, he noticed Ted Morgan watching him with an inscrutable expression. "Interesting speech," Ted commented later at the bar. "Very progressive." "Just pragmatic," Boris countered. "Treating people with dignity and creating real opportunity isn't political, Ted. It's good business and good humanity." Ted swirled his scotch. "And this new direction, It's working for you financially. Boris smiled. Our employee retention is up 20%. We're attracting talented people who share our values, and our reputation has actually improved. Our market position, he shrugged, but even if it hadn't, it would still be the right thing to do. As the evening wound down, Boris found himself beside Melissa on the terrace overlooking Central Park. The May air was crisp but pleasant, the city lights twinkling below them. That was quite a speech, Melissa said. I was embarrassed to be singled out, but the message was powerful. I meant every word, Boris replied, though I realize one night in your apartment hardly qualifies me as an expert on struggle. Melissa smiled. No, but your willingness to learn from it does set you apart from many in that room. She gestured toward the ballroom behind them. How are your studies going? Boris asked. Well, I'm on track to finish my program next year, thanks to the tuition assistance and reasonable work hours. She paused. And Grandma's health has improved significantly with the better care. The doctors are saying she might have years ahead of her, not months. I'm glad to hear that. Boris, Melissa said, using his first name with careful deliberation, I've been meaning to ask you something. Why did you really come to my apartment that night, the truth this time? Boris hesitated, then decided she deserved complete honesty. I was irritated by what I perceived as your excuses for occasionally being late or needing time off. I convinced myself you were exaggerating your challenges because I couldn't imagine a life different from my own. He met her gaze. I wanted to prove myself right. Instead, I proved myself embarrassingly wrong. To his surprise, Melissa laughed softly. You know, that night, I was terrified having my boss in my tiny apartment. I was sure you were judging everything. The leaky faucet, the lumpy couch, the thin walls. I was, Boris admitted, but not in the way you think. I was realizing how much I took for granted and how little I understood about the lives of people who worked for me. A comfortable silence fell between them as they both looked out over the park. I've been offered a position at Mount Sinai, Melissa finally said. A nursing apprenticeship that would start after I complete my degree. Full benefits, career advancement potential. Boris felt a complicated mix of emotions, pride in her accomplishment, but also a selfish desire to keep her at Heller Enterprises. That's wonderful news. They'd be lucky to have you. I haven't decided yet, Melissa continued. Your HR department has also created a healthcare division position that would let me use my nursing education while staying with the company. The choice is entirely yours, Boris assured her. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. You've earned that autonomy. Melissa nodded, appreciation evident in her expression. That means a lot. She hesitated, then added, When I was a little girl in Pennsylvania, my father used to tell me that true wealth wasn't in your bank account. It was in how you treated others and the difference you made in their lives. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Melissa said softly, and I think he would have appreciated what you're trying to do now, using your position to create real change. Inside the ballroom, Victoria appeared at the terrace doors, signaling to Boris that it was time for the final remarks of the evening. He nodded in acknowledgement. Duty calls, he said to Melissa, but thank you for sharing that about your father. It means more than you know. As Boris delivered his closing remarks to the gala attendees, he found himself looking around the ornate ballroom with new eyes. The crystal chandeliers, the floral arrangements worth thousands, the designer gowns and custom tuxedos, all symbols of a world he had once moved through without question. Now he saw both its beauty and its insularity. The privilege it represented was not inherently wrong, but the blindness that often accompanied it was something he could no longer accept in himself or quietly tolerate in others. In the months that followed, Boris's transformation continued to reshape both his company and his personal life. The Heller Foundation's new initiatives gained national attention, with other corporations beginning to adopt similar approaches. He and Victoria downsized from their penthouse to a still luxurious but more modest apartment, using the difference to fund additional community programs. Melissa ultimately chose the position at Mount Sinai, following her passion for direct patient care. Boris supported her decision wholeheartedly. even leveraging his connections to ensure she received mentorship from the hospital's top nursing staff. She and Ellie moved to a more accessible apartment in a building that Heller Enterprises had, renovated specifically for mixed-income housing, close enough to the hospital for Melissa's commute, but still in the Queens neighborhood they called home. 1 year to the day after his experiment, Boris found himself once again at their apartment for dinner. The new space was larger and more comfortable, but still retained the warmth and character of their previous home. Photos of Melissa's parents shared space with new ones, Melissa in her nursing scrubs, Ellie at the community garden she had joined, and even a group photo from the gala showing the three of them with Boris and Victoria. "Admit it," Ellie said as they enjoyed coffee after dinner. "You never imagined you'd be having regular dinners in Queens when you cooked up that scheme to spy on our difficult lives." Boris laughed. "Never. But it's become the highlight of my month." "Mine too," said Victoria, who had gradually become a regular at these gatherings. "Ellie's stories about her library days are better than any Manhattan cocktail party gossip." Melissa watched this exchange with warm amusement. "Life takes unexpected turns. A year ago I was dusting your bookshelves. Now I'm preparing for a career in nursing while my grandmother debates literature with my former employers in our living room." "Former employer, current friend," Boris corrected gently. Later, as Boris and Victoria were leaving, Melissa walked them to the door. "You know," she said quietly, "what you did that night staying here and everything after. It changed my life and Grandma's. I can never repay that." "You already have," Boris replied. "You showed me what real strength and dignity look like. You helped me see beyond my privilege bubble. That's a gift beyond measure." As their car drove back toward Manhattan, Victoria rested her head on Boris's shoulder. "Happy anniversary," she said. "Anniversary?" Boris questioned. 1 year since. You spent the night in Queens and came back a different man." She interlaced her fingers with his. "A better man, though I always saw that potential in you." Boris gazed out the window, watching as they crossed the bridge from Queens back to Manhattan. The city skyline gleamed against the night sky, beautiful, and familiar, yet forever changed in his perception. What had begun as a cynical experiment to prove his housekeeper was exaggerating her challenges had become the catalyst for profound transformation. Not just in his actions or business practices, but in his fundamental understanding of human worth and dignity. He had once measured wealth in square footage and investment returns. Now he understood that true wealth lay in connection, in purpose, in using privilege to create opportunity for others. The night in Queens had opened his eyes to a different kind of richness, one that couldn't be measured in dollars, but in the depth of human experience and the impact of compassionate action. As Manhattan grew closer, Boris reflected on the man he had been a year ago, and the man he was becoming. The journey wasn't complete. He still caught himself in moments of entitled thinking, still had to consciously push beyond the boundaries of his privileged perspective. But each step brought greater clarity and deeper connection to the world beyond his previous limited view. The true experiment, he realized, wasn't that single night in Queens. It was the ongoing choice to see people in their full humanity, to recognize the arbitrary nature of privilege, and to use his position to create meaningful change. It was the experiment in becoming more fully human himself, one that he intended to continue for the rest of his life. Dear listeners, we hope Boris and Melissa's story has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. This tale of transformation reminds us that true wealth isn't found in bank accounts or mansions, but in our capacity for understanding and connection across different worlds. If you've enjoyed this journey of discovery, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. We've created a special playlist of similarly moving stories about unexpected connections and personal growth. You'll find it linked on your left. Join our community of storytelling enthusiasts by sharing your thoughts in the comments below. What moment in this story resonated most with you? We bring you unique narratives every day that explore the complexity and beauty of the human experience. Don't miss our upcoming content. Your next favorite story is waiting just a click away.